I'd like to explore that because that's now thinking in my head.
Yes.
You said in the previous podcast that culture and Islam in some ways can go hand in hand. I struggle with that. To not separate the two. I struggle with blending the two. I have no problem separating.
Yeah.
And then Tisan, you as well.
100%.
What could you say to us that would?
This video is sponsored by Chai Pani Blackburn, the hottest place to get your carrot chai in South Asian street foods. Open from early and closes late means you'll never miss out on all your favorite foods. With a great indoor seating area with friendly staff at your service to a large shared car park with a drive-through style attendant taking your order, so you don't have to leave the comfort of your vehicle. It's a perfect spot to meet and catch up with friends, so make sure you head down to Chai Pani Blackburn in partnership with Brain Cell Squared.
Yeah, so that requires a podcast in and of itself. But what we can do is we wanted to discuss, because of the context of this podcast, we wanted to discuss care for parents and the duty of care that we have towards our parents. So we wanted to discuss that, Birrul Walidain, as it's known Islamically, being good to one's parents. So we wanted to discuss that, and that as an example, if we use that as an example to explore the subject of how culture and religion can be applied in the context of care for parents.
Okay.
Then inshallah that would be a good way of dealing with that subject.
Right.
So, okay, if we look in our community, you have the younger generation, let's start with the older generation. You have the first and some maybe second that are close to the first as well, generations that are very in touch with their culture.
Yes.
When it comes to parents. And then now you have their children that are now slightly moving away from that idea and moving towards just thinking very, what's the word that you used?
Individualistic.
When it comes to Islam. So
very literal.
Literal, very literal when it comes to Islam. Now, okay, here's a hypothetical example, right? Let's say there's a parent that's whose son or daughter has gotten married and has just had a child, for example. Now let's say the parent wants their child and their grandchild to come over to stay, but then the parents, the new parents, the youngsters are saying Islam doesn't say any of this, so I don't have to, give me my own space. But then the grandparents are now, yeah, but it's culture, so you should come over and stay, and then there's a massive clash going on there.
Absolutely.
I'm not asking you to like diagnose the whole issue, but is that like, what am I touching around the same?
Yeah. You're along the right lines. This is the kind of thing we need to grapple with. So what we've got is we've got a tension here. You've got individualist culture of where the relationship between between the family and extended family and the individual is different to a collectivist culture. So there's I think a Letterman interview. David Letterman, old interviewer David Letterman, and someone's just taken a segment out and put it on YouTube, and I came across it a few years ago. So David Letterman interview with the Bollywood actress Aishwarya Rai, Amitabh Bachchan's daughter-in-law. So Aishwarya Rai. So now Hindu culture obviously is another, like Indian is part of Indian culture. Indian culture is again collectivist culture. Now they may do their collectivism different to Islam, and that's something we may discuss as well later on in the podcast. But it's still collectivist culture. So Aishwarya, the Letterman was having doing an interview, Aishwarya Rai, and the question came up about living with one's in-laws. So and one's parents and in-laws. So Actually, I said I live with my in-laws. So they go, well, even at this age, very Western thing to say, isn't it? Yeah, even at this age. So Ashwaya Rai, being Ashwaya Rai, like this is something I do find different between Indians and even many Muslims.
Okay.
I do see this difference between Hindus and Muslims, and that my theory is it's down to economics, because India's economy is stronger than British economy. It's ahead of British economy, Indian's economy.
All right.
Yeah, it's surpassed
You wouldn't think
Britain's economy. Yes, that's where we are at the moment. So it's surpassed Britain's economy. So what happens is when you have the economic, when you're thriving economically, when you're progressing economically, it creates a confidence among the people. So they're able to assert their culture in ways who don't have the economic power. And Muslims countries tend to not have that economic power, so they're less able to assert themselves.
Okay.
So what she said as an Indian woman is that when she was challenged, oh, you still live with your parents, so she turned around and said, at least I don't have to take an appointment with my parents before I meet them.
True.
Which is,
Yeah.
it
makes sense to us.
to assert
Yeah.
her collectivist Hindu culture, even in a interview in the West. She's able to assert. How many Muslims would you see being able to assert their culture in the same way? Let's be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
How many Muslims would end up being given a platform to be able to assert themselves in that way?
Not many.
There's a difference, isn't there?
Of course.
Culturally, there's a difference. I would put that difference down to economic progress, because that gives them that confidence.
Yeah.
So, for example, even in cricket, whatever the Indians say, go, because without India, there is no cricket.
True. The biggest farm base is in India is Sundown.
So, Pakistan doesn't have that
No.
authority.
authority. Bangladesh doesn't have that authority. India has the authority because
It's just
economics,
Yeah,
isn't it?
true.
That's what it comes down to. So it's economic power.
So if we're talking care for parents within our communities, what would you say the best way is to for our community, our youngsters in our community to move towards looking after their parents in this day and age?
So when it comes to birrul walidain and being good to parents and caring for one's parents, in order to understand the role that plays within our deen, within our religion, we first need to understand Islam holistically. Because if we don't understand Islam holistically, we can't understand the role of and the importance of looking after one's parents. So first we have to take a step back and understand Islam holistically. Now, when we speak about Islam, typically the first thing that comes to mind are certain acts of worship, such as salah, praying, or Sawm, fasting in Ramadan, or Hajj and Umrah. That's the kind of thing that primarily comes to our mind. So our understanding of Islam is reductionist, and therefore we don't fully appreciate what Islam is. And therefore what the ulama have done is explained Islam and mentioned that there are 5 spheres of life that Islam has guidance about. So by all means, Islam has guidance about aqaid, beliefs, and ibadat. There are 2 areas where Islam does have guidance and does have teachings, but Islam is not restricted to them. Islam is not restricted to beliefs, Islam is not restricted to worship. Rather, Islam goes beyond that. And therefore there are other areas of life regarding which Islam has guidance about. So Islam also has guidance about akhlaq, character. So when it comes to character, we have a very simplistic understanding of character. But again, when it comes to character, there's halal and there's haram. And we have to understand what the halal of character is, what the haram of character is. So when we have conversations about halal and haram, it'll be about some matter of fiqh, so some item of food, or something about moon sighting, or something about milad or something. So our discussions oftentimes about Islam descend into a conversation about fiqh, and not just fiqh, but also a matter of fiqh which is debated among the ulama. So that's what usually happens. So that's how deductionist our understanding of Islam is. So therefore we need to take a step back and holistically appreciate Islam, because the debates that exist in fiqh, similar debates exist when it comes to the development of one's character. Ulama have written about what's good in one's character, what's bad in one's character, and the debates that exist about that, because it's not clear cut. These things aren't clear cut. So for example, on one hand, Islam teaches us to have tawadu, to have humility. So first we need to understand what humility means, because nowadays, like, you look at the comment section on YouTube, and there's random influencers are referred to as humble. So people are very quick to call someone humble.
True.
You must have experienced that online. So what is humility? So Islam actually has a definition about what humility is, like it has a definition about what kibr and arrogance is. So we have to first understand what these terms mean, and also then there's tensions within these terms. So for example, on one hand, Islam teaches us to have humility, but on the other hand, Islam also teaches us to have izzatun nafs, self-respect. So how do we how do we adopt a synthesis between, on one hand, having humility and self-respect, because it seems contradictory? How can you have self-respect and have humility? There's a tension there. So we have to settle that tension. So things like that require knowledge, but we don't have discussions about that. How many people do we find, how many Muslims do we find that have discussions about this? Even like
when the elders get together on Eid and stuff, there's always one topic that, they talk about. There's only certain things.
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking about, when was the last time we actually sat and talked about character?
Absolutely.
It's the last thing on anyone's mind.
Yeah, because everyone thinks they're perfect.
A very important point. So the modern human being, the starting point of the modern human being is that by default we're good. So I'm good. Now, the moment you think I'm good, where's your spiritual development going to come from? The spiritual development only starts when we acknowledge that I'm marid.
And I think that's
one of
the biggest problems within our community.
Of course.
Because the reason why these conversations are not happening with our, not just elders, but in gatherings, in family gatherings and stuff, because we're all scared to see what's going to be uncovered within ourselves.
Absolutely.
So if there's a conversation about ego, one person might be sat there thinking, I don't like this conversation, because now it's talking about
too close to home.
Yeah.
So one thing we find is you go to the masjid and the imam speaks about something. There's a tendency, especially if people are from people are middle class, so especially typically this is very true of middle class people, and obviously we have a growing middle class Muslim community. So this is very true of middle class people more than even working class people. So middle class people, when the imam speaks, whatever the imam says, they say, "Oh, he's targeting me in the khutbah." Is that what the person attending the khutbah should be thinking?
No.
The person attending the khutbah should be thinking, actually, the imam should be, whatever the imam is saying, I should be applying it to myself. So rather than taking it personally and getting offended by it, actually, the intention should be, I'm attending the khutbah, so I get an opportunity to reflect on myself and to better myself.
Yeah.
So if the imam says something, I should be applying it to myself. That's the whole point of the khutbah.
Yeah, of course.
Not be offended by what the imam is saying.
Says
But
more
this
about
is
you.
the modern mindset.
So when it comes to the parents then, so when it comes to caring for the parents,
Yes.
You mentioned the first 2 points.
So you've got, continuing on with the 5 spheres regarding which Islam has guidance about, you obviously have aqaid and ibadat, you have beliefs and worship, but you also have guidance about akhlaq. That's another sphere of Islam that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have taught us about. Akhlaq, character. The fourth sphere is mu'amalat, so our dealings. So a person's dealing with another person, especially financial dealings, transactions that take place between two human beings. So Islam also has guidance about that. So there again, like when we think about business, we don't, so earning a livelihood and business, we don't generally think about how Islam applies in that context. So when we in the workplace, we don't think about my interaction with the other person and how Islamic that is. It's as though we can do our ibadat, we can perform our umrah, and we can be very diligent about that. But the moment we come into the workplace, we suspend that, and then there's a different person that engages in business and in the workplace. Because we don't see Islam extending to the workplace. We don't see how Islam's applied in that context. So that's a reductionist approach that we have when it comes to Islam, and that then affects us, because then there's so much guidance of Islam we're not applying in our lives.
That's that. So I essentially what you're saying is belief and the ibadat. That's a given. You have to do that. Anyway.
That's a given. That's part of Islam.
That's part of Islam.
That's part of Islam.
But the parts that we're overlooking, because we're focusing, which rightly sure we should be focusing so much on belief and worship as well, but we're overlooking character. We're overlooking the dealings, like you said. So there's another one that you said.
And then the last area of Islam regarding which there's guidance is mu'ashara, community. And this is where birrul walidain sits. It sits under mu'ashara, it sits under community. That looking after one's parents falls under community. That's very because it's about our relationship with community. That's what mu'ashara is about. So it's not our relationships with each other individually, it's our relationships with the community. That's what mu'ashara is about.
Essentially what you've shown us here is basically you've shown us, and this is just for the benefit of the viewers, you've shown us that how important these three other points are.
Absolutely.
And especially the last one, which because it's a topic today,
of course,
the looking after your parents.
Yes.
That is so important that ulama have categorized it as part of one of the five guidance points.
So we have to. So birrul walidain falls under mu'ashara. So it falls under community, and then within that, birrul walidain has like a elevated status.
Okay.
So in the Quran, for example, in Surah Al-Isra, Surah Bani Israel, it's mentioned وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. That your Lord has decreed that you do not worship anyone except Him, and you be good to parents. And be good to your parents. Allah has decreed that. So along with mentioning Tawheed and worshipping Allah alone, Allah has mentioned being good to one's parents. And as the commentators have mentioned, this shows and emphasizes the importance of being good to one's parents. Because it's been mentioned
directly straight after
Tawheed. So that's an example of where in the Quran and in the Sunnah, birrul walidain, being good to one's parents, has been emphasized. And therefore ulama in the past have written books about it. Imam Bukhari has a book about just this subject. So obviously his Sahih is famous. His book, after the Book of Allah, his book, his Sahih, is the most famous. But he also has other books, and among them is a book specifically about birrul walidain, being good to one's parents. That's what the book is titled, birrul walidain. That's the title of the book. And similarly, his book on Al-Adab al-Mufrad, there again, if you go through the first few, like a significant proportion of it at the start, it starts with birrul walidain. Being good to one's parents, and then there's tens of chapters just on birrul walidain. That's how the
essentially
book
It's
starts.
a very big
That's
part of our deen.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's like the foundation
Absolutely.
of it, because obviously, looking after your parents is, the way I see this is, if we're putting aside an Islamic duty, right? If we put that bit aside, and if we're just looking at a dunya sense, any good human would, if for example I did something for you, any good human would say, and I'll do the same back for you, or similar. Our parents, if we put aside the Islamic duties and everything, our parents have done so much for us. When they get older, it's only right that we do the same, if not more, back.
Absolutely.
As that, and I'm just looking at as a dunya sense, like as a
Of course.
not
Just
as a
normal
Muslim
guy,
sense,
yeah,
just a normal
yeah.
guy, whether it's a non-Muslim, white, black, Chinese, Asian, whatever. Anyone should have this kind of mentality.
of course.
My parents have helped me throughout the years from until I was able to sort
Look
everything on
after
my own,
yourself, yeah.
16, 18, whatever. I should only now do that back to them now that they're older. I should be
Absolutely.
helping them.
Absolutely.
It's only right as a human.
Absolutely. So there's an emphasis on birrul walidain. Now, what we have is, you have that emphasis on one hand. So then, let's interrogate that further. So like we did when it came to community, why do we have a problem with doing community? And we discussed that earlier. Why do we have a problem when it comes to looking after our parents? Let's interrogate that.